Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky joins G7 talks in Japan. Russia claims its forces have captured the town of Bakhmut in Donetsk. And police continue their investigation into a murder case in Yunlong. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky joined Group of 7 talks in Japan today. He met G7 leaders, including U.S. President Joe Biden, as Western allies have agreed more military assistance, including F-16 fighter jets and pilot training. David Garrett reports.
Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky takes his place in the middle of leaders at the G7 summit in Japan. In times gone by, Vladimir Putin would have been in this family photo in the days of the G8. Russia was expelled from the group when it annexed Crimea in 2014. Zelensky made a dramatic arrival into Japan on Sunday. On the sidelines, the Ukraine leader held bilateral meetings with most of the other leaders and held discussions with US President Joe Biden. Biden announced a new $375 million military package for Ukraine. This came after the US had already announced it will allow training on American-made F-16 jets.
The United States continues to help Ukraine respond, recover, and rebuild. And we're also supporting their pursuit of a just peace. Just one aspect of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It has to be non-negotiable. It has to happen.
I really didn't know the details, but I know that you gave us very big package during this year. It's more than 37 billion. My appreciations. We never forget.
Zelensky had already met with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Canada's leader Justin Trudeau.
Important conversations going on. The G7 stands strongly in support of you, as does Canada, but really good conversations with emerging economies in the global context as well. Lots of good sessions this morning.
The G7 strategy is clear. Our military, diplomatic and economic tools are all part of the Ukrainian counter-offensive. We're delivering more support on the battlefield through air defence, artillery, tanks and long-range missiles, which the UK was the first country to provide.
Zelensky was also seen on the sidelines of the summit talking with India's leader Narendra Modi. India's been one of the few countries not to condemn the Russian invasion, and G7 leaders hoped Zelensky's appearance would convince the global south to do more to deter Russia. Amid the talk of war in Ukraine, a ceremony to highlight peace. The leaders of the Group of 7 nations and the 8 outreach countries, including Indonesia and Australia, laid wreaths in Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. The world's first atomic strike killed an estimated 140,000 people in 1945. There were tens of thousands of Korean victims. Flanked by their wives, the host of the G7 summit, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol laid flowers at a memorial for Korean victims, a display of warming ties between the two countries. Yoon praised Kishida's courage at becoming the first Japanese leader to pay respects at the monument jointly with his South Korean counterparts. David Garrett, TVB News.
The Group of 7 industrialized nations, in a signal to Beijing, issued a communique warning countries that attempt to use trade as a weapon would face consequences. China, which is not part of the G7, issued a statement accusing the G7 of interfering in its internal affairs. Matthew Bray reports.
Worried by the position China has in global supply chains, the G7 set out a common strategy towards future dealings with that country. It stated that there wasn't any decoupling in the offing, but that economic resilience requires de-risking and diversifying. It continued that a growing China that plays by international rules would be of global interest. In a statement issued Saturday from its embassy in Japan, China said the G7 had instigated bloc politics and was creating division. Another statement put out by the Foreign Ministry said it firmly opposed the G7 joint statement and had complained to Japan, the summit organizer. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said he backed the G7 statement on easing trade reliance with China and alluded to the interception of a Royal Australian Air Force plane in the South China Sea last year.
We have said for some time that China's activity, and we've expressed concern for ourselves as well, the strafing of one of our aircraft. The other activity that we've seen has provided concern. We've expressed that concern in the past. We'll continue to do so. What we need to do is to make sure that we work in a way that enhances peace, security and stability in the region.
The leaders of the Quad, a group including the United States, Japan, India and Australia, said they sought a region where no country dominates and no country is dominated. Another G7 nation, Germany, heavily dependent on China with huge investments there, seemed to go against the grain. Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that big investments would continue, even as they try to limit exposure to that country. Matthew Bray, TVB News.
Russia claims to have captured the city of Bakhmut in Donetsk after a grueling and bloody 8-month siege against Ukraine's forces. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky initially appeared to have confirmed the loss of the city, but his spokesman later denied this was the case. The mining city has been the focus of intense fighting, with thousands of lives lost on both sides. Nazvi Karim has more.
When asked if Bakhmut was still in Ukraine's hands, President Volodymyr Zelensky had this to say.
I think no, but you have to understand that there is nothing. They destroyed everything. There are no buildings. It's a pity, it's tragedy, but for today, Bakhmut is only in our hearts. There is nothing on this place.
Later on social media, Zelensky's spokesman Sergei Nikiforov tracked back on the president's response. Rewording the reporter's question to "Russians say they have taken Bakhmut," he wrote that Zelensky replied, "I think no." In this way, Nikiforov wrote, the president denied the capture of Bakhmut. For the Russian side, though, there is no ambiguity. Mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner group that has been fighting alongside Russian troops, said the capture of Bakhmut was complete after 8 months of intense fighting, costing thousands of lives on both sides. Russian President Vladimir Putin was even reported to have congratulated Wagner and his armed forces for the victory. Ukrainian military spokesperson Sergei Shcherevachi told Reuters, "This is not true. Our units are fighting in Bakhmut." The salt mining town had a pre-war population of up to 80,000, but now it is a city of ruins and rubble. But just how strategic is the city?
Well, because the whole thing about Bakhmut, which has been very strange from the beginning, is the Russian need to take it, because Bakhmut is of no strategic importance. It doesn't make anything. So there's a war industry there. There's no raw materials there that are desperately needed for the Ukrainian war effort. There are no people there. Almost everybody has left. I mean, it's basically just empty buildings. And yet the Russians seem to put enormous store into the idea that they would take it, so that they were going to make, and it probably was, at least for a while, a entirely political campaign from the Russian point of view.
Prigozhin had himself acknowledged that Bakhmut had no strategic significance and was merely symbolic. But whoever has control of the city, the Bakhmut saga continues, and so does the war. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
Sudan's warring military factions have agreed to a new short-term ceasefire, according to American and Saudi mediators. After a meeting in the Saudi city of Jeddah, the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces agreed to a 7-day ceasefire. It will take effect Monday morning local time in Sudan. This ceasefire will be enforced by an American-Saudi monitoring mechanism, a statement said, without elaborating. The latest agreement also calls for the distribution of humanitarian aid. Fighting, which broke out on April 15th, was triggered by plans to integrate the rapid support forces into the army as Sudan was supposed to shift towards democracy. Greece is voting in a general election, and opinion polls suggest it's unlikely to produce a clear winner. The two main protagonists are the ruling Conservative Party of New Democracy, led by Kyriakos Mitsotakis, and Syriza, the left-wing party headed by Alexis Tsipras. A new system of proportional representation would seem to make it difficult for any party to gain enough seats without seeking coalition partners. If there is no clear winner, a second vote will take place in July. This is the first election held in Greece since the country ceased to be under the mandate of international lenders after the withering financial crisis brought the Mediterranean nation to its knees. A pilot is recovering in hospital after having to eject seconds before an F-18 fighter jet crashed at a Spanish Air and Space Force base in the north of the country. The footage shows emergency crews at the facility outside Zaragoza. Spanish authorities say the pilot is recovering favorably after the lucky escape. He was forced to parachute out of the aircraft at low altitude during the exercise and suffered injuries to his legs. The plane crashed within the perimeter of the base, and an investigation is underway to determine the cause. Back locally, police are still investigating a murder case in Yunlong. A woman was found lying on the pavement of Kampok Road East with multiple stab wounds Saturday night. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Police also found an electric saw and a butcher's knife nearby. Officers from the Regional Crime Unit carried out investigations at the victim's home at Man Yun Chun in Yunlong this afternoon. Some residents say she was a homeowner and a very nice lady. The 54-year-old woman had neck and back stab wounds when she was found by police Saturday night. Officers seized a blood-stained electric saw, a 30-centimeter-long butcher's knife, and a pair of gloves on site, believed to be linked to the case. The case has been classified as murder. Her actual cause of death has yet to be determined, pending autopsy results. Preparatory works are underway to enact legislation under Article 23 of the Basic Law. Secretary for Justice Paul Lam said he expects a balance between safeguarding national security and protecting personal freedom. The government aims to complete the legislation earliest by this year and latest by next year. The Justice Secretary said the reason the legislation stalled 20 years ago was the anxiety felt by people given the political sentiment at the time. He noted Hong Kong is a place that respects the spirit of justice and human rights, and there is no reason to feel ashamed. Lam said authorities will ensure striking a balance between safeguarding national security and protecting freedoms when formulating the legislation. The Chief Executive Officer of the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce has been speaking on the state of the local economy. Export growth remains weak. He added that since almost all adult residents are employed and the world is scrambling for talent, importing mainland workers for the labour force is a logical step. Veronica Lin reports.
Hong Kong recorded growth in its economy during the first quarter of this year, said George Leung, CEO of Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce. However, stunted growth in exports as well as the reduction of the labour force still weigh.
First of all, I think you all know that Hong Kong has a severe labour shortage problem. It's scattered at all levels. Particularly the middle level, you saw that we have a lot of people moving out of Hong Kong. And the recent survey from our chamber indicate that the middle level, the management, is the most having the most shortage of labour. We needed to address this issue to import more talent from the rest of the world. So we need to simplify our administrative procedure and also welcome all these people coming to Hong Kong.
He added that middle-level workers only account for a small portion of the 3.7 million strong workforce. However, with the continual outflow of middle-level workers, the economy does not have enough momentum to move forward, he added. So, the SAR should turn to cities on the mainland to import talent.
Of course, we need also to look up to the mainland China. There's quite a large labour market there, and particularly the middle and the lower level, as well as the talent in the innovation, that they can come to Hong Kong to work to help Hong Kong to upgrade ourselves. So we needed to have a more open attitude towards importing of talent.
He believes that everyone will suffer if there's lack of talent and a stagnant economy. Veronica Lin, TVB News.
Still ahead on tonight's news. A clarification over workers' resting time when the heat stress at work warning is issued. HK ETO in service at the Shingmun tunnels. And shipwrecks with a large amount of porcelain and other artifacts newly discovered in the South China Sea. Welcome back to TVB News. The new heat stress at work warning has been implemented for about a week. It allows employees working outdoors or indoors without air conditioning to take appropriate rest during work, depending on the level of heat. While there are concerns over how best to comply with the guidelines, authorities told TVB News the resting time can be shortened if employers have done enough to protect workers from heat-related illnesses.
There are 3 levels of the heat stress at work warning. For instance, under the amber warning, it is recommended that construction workers take a 45-minute break for every 15 minutes spent on the job. Many in the sector think it's simply not feasible. Speaking to TVB News, Deputy Commissioner for Labour Vincent Fung said the guidelines were set up under the condition that employers have not done any heat prevention measure. He said the duration of rest can be reduced if employers have done enough prevention measures, so it's not like employees should stop working under the heat every single time. Under the current guidelines, if employers provide fans or shelters for workers, a total of 30 minutes can be reduced from the duration of rest breaks. Still, how should one determine if the fan or the area of shelter is enough? Feng said the design and environmental conditions of different work premises are not the same, adding that if employers have questions, they can reach out to the authorities. He also said the main point is the shelter can prevent employees from being directly under the sun, and it's hoped that their body temperatures will not exceed 38 degrees Celsius. The Deputy Commissioner stressed that the Labour Department has always encouraged employers to let workers take a break every 2 hours during work, and denied the latest measures have caused confusion between employers and their workers. Over the past few days, the authorities have carried out 500 inspections, and most employers have followed the guidelines.
The free-flowing toll system HK ETO began service at the Shingmun tunnels today, with 26,305 cars passing through up until 5:30 p.m. This is the Shingmun tunnels where the new e-toll system was implemented. While drivers are no longer required to stop at toll booths to pay fees, some are still not adapting to the changes yet. For instance, this car. It got stopped for a reason, as the driver thought he could still pay the tunnel fee by cash. A tunnel staff member then went over and assisted him. Following Shingmun, the system will also be extended to the Lion Rock Tunnel next Sunday. An airline company earlier sold unusually cheap air tickets to customers due to a suspected computer system error. While the airline initially confirmed the validity of the tickets, they soon changed their minds by recalling the tickets and refunding the relevant individuals. The Consumer Council said residents should pay attention to details before making such purchases. Mimosa Ngai reports.
Many people like to buy cheap or discounted items, including air tickets. This is Mr. Ip, who loves to travel. Unlike many, Ip does not travel to places where he desires. His destinations are decided by the prices of tickets. Last month, he bought 3 return first and business class tickets via the Vietnamese version of All Nippon Airways official website, going from Indonesia to America and the Caribbean through Japan. He also explained the situation could have resulted from the airline company's computer system, such as after the website being refreshed. All Nippon Airways then realized the error and told air passengers that unusually cheap tickets would still be confirmed. However, the company soon changed its mind. The airline is not the first company that created such an error. Cathay Pacific also made a similar mistake 4 years ago. The acting deputy chief executive of the Consumer Council, Francis Ho, said consumers should seek clarification from airlines on whether tickets can be confirmed before buying them. Ho added such an action can minimize losses on the part of consumers, as their expenses on hotel accommodation and insurance may not be fully refunded if their air tickets are not confirmed. Mimosa Ngai, TVB News.
The National Cultural Heritage Administration has announced new discoveries in the northwest part of the South China Sea. They found 2 shipwrecks containing over 100,000 pieces of porcelain and other artifacts from the Ming Dynasty. 1,500 meters underwater, huge amounts of porcelain were stacked on top of each other. The administration said the artifacts from one of the ships were spread out across nearly 10,000 square meters at the bottom of the sea, with some of them confirmed to be from the Zhengde era of the Ming Dynasty, dating back 500 years. The chief archaeologist said this great discovery proves that Chinese people had explored and traveled to and from the South China Sea, and it should be considered as a major historical breakthrough. That's the news. Thanks for watching.